I never thought a simple dinner invitation would uncover a truth that shattered my entire world. It started as an ordinary evening. My husband's boss was coming over for dinner. But what happened next? It left me breathless, trembling, questioning everything I knew. Stay with me till the end, because this story will shake you to the core. I never imagined a simple dinner invitation would change my life forever. It was a Friday evening, one of those nights where the air felt still, almost too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. I was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of creamy mashed potatoes, trying to ignore the nervous energy in my chest. Tonight was important. My husband, Lewis, had spent the entire week stressing over this dinner, checking every detail twice, making sure everything was flawless. His boss, the powerful and respected Mr. Carter, was coming over for the first time. "You sure this looks okay?" Lewis asked for the 10th time, adjusting his tie in the reflection of the microwave. I let out a small chuckle, trying to ease his tension. "You look fine. Relax." He exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his neatly combed hair. "You don't understand. This isn't just dinner. This is about my future. If tonight goes well, I could get that promotion." I walked over, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "Then trust yourself. You've worked hard for this." The words seemed to calm him, at least for a moment, but deep down something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but a strange unease sat heavy in my stomach, like an unseen force whispering that this night would be more than just a simple dinner. Then the doorbell rang. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't know why. Maybe it was nerves, or maybe it was something else. Lewis shot me a look. "He's here." I nodded, smoothing down my dress before walking to the door. When I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. Mr. Carter stood in the doorway, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud rolling in. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark, intelligent eyes that held an intensity I couldn't quite decipher. He carried himself with a quiet authority, powerful yet composed. He was dressed in a crisp, tailored suit, but there was something rugged beneath the polished exterior, something that made my skin prickle. "Mrs. Lawson," he said smoothly, his deep voice wrapping around my name like a secret. "It's a pleasure." I swallowed, forcing a polite smile. "Please, come in." As he stepped inside, I caught a glimpse of something strange in his expression. Just for a second, a flicker of recognition, like he knew me, like he had seen me before. But that was impossible. I had never met this man in my life. "Thank you for having me," he said, looking around the house with slow, deliberate eyes. "Feels familiar." A shiver crawled up my spine. Lewis beamed, oblivious to the strange tension in the air. "We are honoured to have you, sir. Please, make yourself comfortable." Mr. Carter nodded, but kept his eyes on me a moment longer before finally moving towards the dining room. My fingers twitched as I shut the door behind him. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As I followed them to the table, I noticed Lewis's excitement, the way he hung on to every word Mr. Carter said. He admired this man, respected him. But I couldn't ignore the unease curling inside me. Then, halfway through dinner, everything changed. Because Mr. Carter looked me in the eye and said something that made my heart stop. "You look just like him." The room went silent. I frowned. "I'm sorry." "What?" His lips curled into a knowing smile. "You don't know, do you?" My chest tightened. "Know what?" Mr. Carter leaned back, his gaze locked onto mine. "We have a lot to talk about." And in that moment, I knew. This night was about to unravel secrets I was never supposed to know. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room around me faded, the soft clinking of silverware and the gentle hum of conversation disappearing into the background. Mr. Carter's words echoed in my mind. "You look just like him." Who was he talking about? My father. But how would he know my father? I forced a nervous chuckle, trying to shake off the sudden weight pressing against my chest. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Carter." His eyes, dark, piercing, didn't waver. He took a slow sip of his wine, his gaze never leaving mine. "Your father?" he said simply. "You have his eyes." My stomach twisted. Lewis, who had been cutting into his steak, looked up with confusion. "Wait, what? You knew her father?" Mr. Carter set his glass down carefully, his fingers tapping against the stem. His expression was unreadable, but there was something deep, something heavy behind his eyes. "I did," he said, his voice carrying a weight that sent a chill through me. "A long time ago." The air in the room shifted. The warmth from the candlelit dinner vanished. replaced by an unsettling coldness that seeped into my skin. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around my fork. "That's impossible. My father never mentioned you." Mr. Carter let out a low chuckle, but it wasn't amused, it was knowing. "That doesn't surprise me." He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. "There were things he couldn't tell you." A strange pressure built in my chest, a mixture of confusion, fear, and something else, something I couldn't quite name. Lewis glanced between us, his brows furrowing. "I don't understand. What exactly are you saying?" Mr. Carter exhaled slowly, his fingers lacing together. "I think it's best we discuss this in private." A lump formed in my throat. "Number, tell me now." The corner of his mouth lifted just barely. "You're just like him," he murmured. "Brave, stubborn." My pulse pounded against my ribs. I didn't know why, but something about this conversation terrified me. It was as if a door had been opened, a door I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through. Lewis frowned, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "I don't like where this is going." Neither did I. But I needed to know. Taking a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and met Mr. Carter's gaze head-on. "Tell me the truth." For the first time that night, something in his expression softened. Regret, pain, maybe even guilt. "Your father and I..." He paused as if carefully choosing his next words. "We were more than just acquaintances. We were like brothers." A sharp pang shot through my chest. "That's not possible. My father never talked about anything like that." "Because he was protecting you." His voice was steady, calm, but there was something raw beneath it. "There are things about his past that you were never meant to know until now." My hands trembled slightly as I set my fork down. "What kind of things?" Mr. Carter exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "Let's just say, your father wasn't the man you thought he was. He had a past, one that would change everything you believe about your family." A cold shiver ran down my spine. My father had always been quiet, reserved. He had never spoken about his youth, his friends, or his life before me. I had thought nothing of it until now. Lewis's voice broke through the tension. "This is insane. If you know something, just say it." Mr. Carter studied me for a long moment before speaking. "After dinner," he said simply. "Some conversations shouldn't be had over a meal." His words sent another wave of unease through me, but I nodded, because deep down I knew whatever he was about to tell me was going to change my life forever. The weight of Mr. Carter's words pressed against my chest like an unseen force. The dinner that was supposed to be a casual evening had turned into something much darker, something I wasn't prepared for. Lewis and I cleaned up in silence. I could feel his unease, the way he kept glancing at me, but neither of us spoke. The air between us felt heavy, charged with unspoken questions. Mr. Carter stood by the living room window, looking out as if lost in thought. He held his glass of wine, swirling it slowly, the deep red liquid reflecting in the dim light. When we finally joined him, he turned, his expression unreadable. "You're ready to hear the truth?" His voice was calm, but there was something beneath it, a hesitation, a warning. I swallowed hard. "Yes." Lewis sat beside me, arms crossed. "This better not be some game." Mr. Carter ignored him. His gaze was locked on me. "I worked with your father," he began. "Not in an office, not in a company, but in something much bigger. Something dangerous." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" He set his glass down. "Your father and I were part of a movement, a secret organization that worked behind the scenes, fighting against corruption, exposing the people who thought they were untouchable." My breath caught. "What?" Mr. Carter's face remained unreadable. He wasn't just an ordinary man, he was one of the best, brilliant, fearless, but then something happened. I felt my hands tremble. This couldn't be true. My father was just my father. A man who worked hard, who loved his family. He wasn't part of anything like this. Lewis shifted uncomfortably beside me. This sounds like a conspiracy theory, but deep down I wasn't so sure. I remembered the nights when my father would stare out the window as if watching for something. The times he would stop mid-sentence as if thinking too carefully about his words. The times he would remind me over and over again, "If anything ever happens to me, just know that I did what I had to do." At the time I thought he was just being overprotective, but now I wasn't so sure. I forced myself to speak. "Why are you telling me this now?" Mr. Carter's jaw tightened. "Because the people we were up against, they haven't forgotten. And now that you're old enough, now that you're in the right position, they will come for you." A sharp chill crawled up my spine. Lewis scoffed. "Come for her? For what? She's just..." Mr. Carter's voice was firm. "She's his daughter, that's enough. I gripped the armrest of the couch, my breathing shallow. "I don't understand. What do they want from me?" Mr. Carter hesitated, then reached into his jacket. My heart pounded as he pulled out a small worn envelope. He held it out to me. "This was left for you," he said. "By your father. He gave it to me years ago, told me to give it to you when the time was right." My fingers trembled as I took it. The paper was old, slightly yellowed at the edges. My father's handwriting was on the front, my name. I could barely hear my own heartbeat as I slowly opened it. Inside was a letter, just a few sentences, but they hit me like a punch to the gut. "My dearest daughter, if you're reading this, it means my past has caught up to me. There are things I never told you, things I kept hidden to protect you. But now you need to know the truth. Trust no one blindly. And if he's still alive, trust Carter. He will guide you." Tears burned my eyes. My father had left this for me. He knew something would happen. He knew I would need protection. I looked up at Mr. Carter, my voice barely a whisper. "What does this mean?" His expression softened, but his eyes remained intense. "It means you're not just his daughter. You're his legacy. And whether you like it or not, you're part of this now." A heavy silence filled the room. My world had just shifted. Everything I thought I knew about my father, about my life, it was all a lie. And now there was no turning back. The letter trembled in my hands, the words burning into my mind. "Trust no one blindly." My father's warning echoed in my ears like a drumbeat of fear. I looked up at Mr. Carter, my heart pounding. "What exactly does this mean? What am I part of?" Mr. Carter sighed, his fingers pressing against his temples as if the weight of the truth was exhausting. "Your father wasn't just exposing corruption. He was protecting something that people were willing to kill for." A shiver ran through me. Lewis frowned beside me. "This is insane. She's just an ordinary woman. She doesn't have anything to do with this." Mr. Carter's gaze darkened. "Do you really believe that? That they'll see it the same way?" My breath caught. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to pretend this was all some ridiculous misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I remembered the strange times from my childhood, the hushed phone calls my father would take late at night, the way he always made sure the doors were locked twice, the way he avoided certain conversations when I asked about his past. I had ignored the signs, and now they were coming back to haunt me. I swallowed hard. What were they after? What was he protecting? Mr. Carter hesitated. Information, but not just any information, proof, evidence that could bring down people in high places, people who control things from behind the scenes. He leaned forward. "And now they think you have it." Hey, my stomach twisted into knots. "But I don't." Mr. Carter studied me. "Are you sure?" I opened my mouth to argue, but then I stopped. My father never spoke about his past, but he did leave things behind. Old notebooks, locked drawers, documents he never let me see. Was it possible that somewhere in his things I held the key to everything? A cold dread settled inside me. Lewis stood up, shaking his head. "All right, this is enough. You can't just come into our home and dump some thriller movie conspiracy on my wife." He turned to me, his face lined with frustration. "Let's be real, honey. This is crazy." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But then Mr. Carter pulled something from his pocket and tossed it onto the table. A photograph. I hesitated before picking it up, and when I did, my blood ran cold. It was a picture of my father, standing with Mr. Carter, but they weren't alone. There were two other men beside them, and one of them, I recognized him instantly. A senator, a man who had been found dead last month. I felt the world tilt. "This can't be real," I whispered. Mr. Carter's expression was grave. "It is, and it's only the beginning." Lewis ran a hand through his hair. "This doesn't prove anything. Just because they knew each other doesn't mean—" "Look at the date," Mr. Carter interrupted. I flipped the photo over. My hands shook. It was dated just 3 weeks before my father died. I sucked in a sharp breath. My father had died in an accident. That's what I had been told. That's what I had believed. But now that story was unraveling before my eyes. This wasn't an accident, was it? My voice was barely a whisper. Mr. Carter's silence was my answer. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I clenched the photo in my hands, my knuckles white. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because it wasn't safe," he said. "But now they're watching. They know who you are, and they won't stop until they find what your father left behind." A chill crawled over my skin. "What do we do?" Lewis asked, his voice quieter now, the skepticism fading from his face. Mr. Carter's jaw tightened. "We prepare. Because once they come knocking, his eyes met mine, dark and unwavering, they won't be asking nicely. The pounding on the door grew louder, each bang a violent demand for entry. My heart pounded in my chest like a war drum. This was it. Lewis squeezed my hand, his grip tight with fear. Mr. Carter stood rigid, his gun raised, eyes locked on the door. I could hear the men outside murmuring, their patience wearing thin. I had two choices. I could run and spend my life looking over my shoulder, or I could face the truth head on, find out what my father had been protecting, and take control of my own fate. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Open the door," Mr. Carter's head snapped toward me. "Are you crazy?" I shook my head. "I won't live in fear. If my father trusted you, then I trust you. But I need answers, and running won't get them." Lewis looked horrified. "Are you serious? These people, they want something from me," I interrupted, "and I need to know what it is." The room fell into silence. Then, after a moment, Mr. Carter nodded. "Fine, but we do this my way." Slowly he stepped forward and unlocked the door. The moment the latch clicked, it swung open with force. 3 men stood there, dressed in dark suits. They didn't look like ordinary criminals. They looked official, as if they belonged to something much bigger than just a group of thugs. The man in the centre, tall with a calm but intimidating presence, stepped inside first. "Mrs. Calloway," he said smoothly, as if we were old acquaintances, "I'm glad you decided to cooperate." I stood my ground. "Who are you?" The man smiled faintly. "That's not important. What is important is that we know your father left something behind. Something he shouldn't have had." I swallowed. "I don't know what you're talking about." His smile didn't waver. "Lying won't help you." Mr. Carter took a step forward, his gun still in hand but lowered. "You should leave." The man's eyes flicked to him. Carter, always playing the loyal soldier. "Tell me, do you really think protecting her will change anything? We'll get what we came for one way or another." A cold chill ran down my spine. I took a deep breath. What if I do have what my father left behind? "What then?" The man tilted his head. "Then we talk." A feeling deep in my gut told me that was a lie. They wouldn't talk. They'd take whatever they wanted and leave nothing but destruction behind, and that's when it hit me. They didn't know where it was. If they did, they wouldn't be here asking questions. I needed to buy time. I exhaled slowly, feigning calm. "Fine, but I need proof." "How do I know you're telling the truth?" The man smirked. "Smart girl." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small black device. He clicked a button, and suddenly my father's voice filled the room. "If anything happens to me, protect my daughter. They will come for her. But she has the key. She just doesn't know it yet." My knees nearly buckled. Lewis grabbed my arm to steady me. Mr. Carter's face darkened. The man studied my reaction, his smirk growing. "You see, your father trusted you more than you think. So, where is it?" A strange calm settled over me. My father had left me something powerful, something dangerous, and now it was my responsibility to find it. I looked the man straight in the eye. "I don't know, but I will find it." The smirk vanished. "That's unfortunate." For a tense moment I thought he would order his men to attack, but instead he exhaled sharply and stepped back. "You have 48 hours. If you don't find it by then, we'll be back." His tone left no room for misunderstanding. Next time, they wouldn't be asking. He nodded to his men, and just like that, they left. The door clicked shut, leaving behind a suffocating silence. I finally let out a shaky breath, my mind spinning. Mr. Carter turned to me. You know what this means, right?" I nodded. "I have 2 days to figure out what my father was hiding, or we're dead." Lewis ran a hand through his hair. "This is insane. What if we just disappear, leave everything behind?" I shook my head. "Number, this is my father's legacy, and I'm going to finish what he started." Mr. Carter gave me a rare look of approval. "Then we better get started." I looked at the photograph still clutched in my hand. Somewhere hidden within my father's past was the truth, and I was going to find it.